I finally found my dream tent. Stick around and I'll tell you why the snowpeak Living Shell Long Pro is the perfect tent shelter to take camping with you all year round. Welcome to my channel. I've had a crush on the snowpeak Living Shell Long Pro since summer of last year when I went to California. I saw it in person during a group camp and I couldn't help but fall in love with the shape and the functionality of the Living Shell Long Pro. In my opinion, it's one of Snowpeak's best shelter that allows camper to camp year-round. It has 3 configurations that really adapts to your need, whether you're solo camping, camping with your small family, or camping with a large group of friends or family. Let's first dive into the general feature of the Living Shell Long Pro, then we can talk about the different configurations and the practical usage of the Living Shell Long Pro. Before we start, Snowpeak did send me the Living Shell Long Pro, the Land Breeze Pro 4, and some other products that you're gonna see in this video to try out, but they didn't pay me to do this video and they didn't expect me to do this video, so this video is 100% of my own opinion. To start out, the Living Shell Long Pro is part of Snowpeak's Pro series of tents and shelters. This is really an upgrade from the entry-level tent and shelter like the Alpha Breeze, the Mini Dome, and the Land Nest. Like all other tents and shelters that are in the Pro series, it's designed for 4-season camping. That means that you can take this shelter camping with you in the winter. The biggest difference between the Pro Series and entry-level tent and shelter from Snowpeak is the material. The Living Shell Long Pro has a denier rating of 150D, and the entry-level tents and shelters has a denier rating of about 75D. So what does that really mean to you? Well, it means that the Living Shell Long Pro can withstand harsher weather in rain, snow, and everything else that you throw at it comparing to the entry-level tent and shelter from Snowpeak. The quality of the material in the Living Shell Long Pro is top-notch. The only downside to this is that the Living Shell Long Pro is heavier than the entry-level tents and shelter. The Living Shell Long Pro weighs in at about 41 pounds compared to your entry tents that weighs in about 20 pounds. The Living Shell Long Pro has a capacity for up to 6 people, but I find it more comfortable to have only 4 people in the shelter. Now, I have good news for those of you that are really tall. The highest point in the Living Shell Long Pro is 7 feet. It gets lower at the front of the Living Shell Long Pro's awning and dips down to 5 feet 10. Now, I'm 5'11" and I find it extremely comfortable to walk around the Living Shell Long Pro without really having to duck or crouch. One of my favorite features of the Living Shell Long Pro is the massive amount of mesh panels that you see here. This allows flexibility to bunker up and keep in the heat on cold days or open up fully on hot days for maximum ventilation. The mesh panel on the Living Shell Long Pro is a testament to the craftsmanship of this shelter. Each panel is precisely stitched and you can tell how well crafted it is when you set it up properly. There aren't any sagging points or wrinkles throughout the body of the Living Shell Long Pro. It looks amazing with a beautiful shape that blends in with nature. This is paired with a skirt that reduces wind from gushing in underneath your tent. Most of the entry tent and shelters do not have a skirt, but on the other hand, I don't stick down my skirts that often unless if it's really windy and I'm bothered by the wind. Speaking of setup time, my first impression of the Living Shell Long Pro is that it's gonna take way too long to set up and it might be too complicated, but honestly, after setting it up, it's not much more complicated than the Alpha Breeze. Just like the Alpha Breeze, the Living Shell Long Pro has an A-frame base, so all you need to do is set up the A-frame and then attach other pulls to it. As a tip for setup, just be careful when you set up the A-frame. It has to bend outwards, not inwards. I made this mistake on another A-frame Snowpeak tent and slightly bent the pull due to tension. After setting up the A-frame, you'll just have to set up 3 more long pulls to complete the frame. It isn't as bad as I thought. If I can set it up in 30 minutes by myself, you could do it with a partner in much faster time. Now, let's move on to the front side of the Living Shell Long Pro. The front side could be set up as an awning to extend the living space. The awning flare could be zipped up or spread out like a bat wing. It's really nice to have an awning set up to enjoy nature when it's raining. The backside of the Living Shell Long Pro could be left as it is, or it could be rolled up to create more of an opening. However, the main purpose of the backside of the Living Shell Long Pro is to dock it with another tent. I'll show you how the Living Shell Long Pro docks with the Land Breeze Pro 4 later on in the video, but for now, let's talk about the different configurations for the Living Shell Long Pro. The Living Shell Long Pro has 3 configurations. You can use it as a shelter with an inner tent, or you can use it as a shelter on its own, or you can use it as a shelter that docks with a tent. Let's start with the Living Shell Long Pro set up with an inner tent. Setting up the inner tent is easy. It's just a matter of snapping on the inner tent to the frame of the backside of the shelter. The clips are sewed together in the inner tent with a bungee. I think the bungee is a little thin, and I wish if it was straps instead. We'll see with time if the bungee wears out or not. The inner tent takes up almost half of the Living Shell Long Pro's space. As you can see here, I can fit an expat mega mat with room for my personal belongings and a single action table. There's even room for me to stand and change clothes. The inner tent is very spacious for a solo camper. However, the space is tight when I use the expat mega mat dual. The expat mega mat dual is a 2-person mattress, so it'll sleep a couple. There's enough room for personal belongings, but not really room for anything else. There also isn't room to comfortably stand and change clothes. One of the biggest advantages of having an inner tent is that it keeps bugs out that are coming up from the ground, and it provides privacy. You can zip up the inner tent to change clothing or have a rest while everybody else is hanging out in the lounging area. I have the entry IGT and a couple of beach chairs set up in the living room area in front of the inner tent. There's just enough room for this setup while keeping storage boxes inside the shelter. Though you can have a more complex and expanded IGT setup, I find it just a little bit too crowded in this situation. Now keep in mind that you can open up the awning to expand your living space, but remember, this space is not permanent. So I wouldn't set up my IGT in the awning space area. Actually, one of my favorite ways to use the Living Shell Long Pro is just a shelter on its own. Now this is great for non-buggy season like fall and winter when you don't need protection from bugs coming off the ground, but it's not so great during summer. My wife and I sleep on a cot without an inner tent. There's enough space for both of us to eat, cook, and sleep all in one shelter. The cot is set up in the back side of the shelter. There's room for a single action table on the farthest back side of the shelter and plenty of room in between the 2 cots for you to curate to your needs. I kept the same entry IGT setup because it has the same space available as when I had the inner tent set up. These 2 configurations are great when you're solo camping or camping with a partner, but it's not so great when you want to accommodate more people and have a sleeping area. You'll need to figure some way to move your sleeping area outside the shelter, and luckily, the Living Shell Long Pro allows you to dock. The Living Shell Long Pro allows you to dock with a lot of different snowpeak tents, but it doesn't naturally dock with all snowpeak tents. In this case, I have the Land Breeze Pro 4 to dock with the Living Shell Long Pro. The Land Breeze Pro 4 is a 5 to 6 person tent, so it's going to give your family a lot of living space to sleep in. I'll talk more about the Land Breeze Pro 4 in another video, so stay tuned. The way that I dock a tent to a shelter is to set the shelter up first, then dock the tent later. It's just a matter of unzipping one of the panel in the back of the Living Shell Long Pro and moving the Land Breeze Pro 4 into it to fit. It's a tight fit as you have to squeeze the front pull of the Land Breeze to fit through the Living Shell Long Pro. The connection between the shelter and the tent should be very tight. This will prevent rain from going through the shelter, but it isn't perfect. I can imagine that there will be a small amount of rain that will naturally slide through the gap under heavy rain. Nonetheless, this shouldn't be an issue as it will only land in the deep corner of the Living Shell Long Pro. Having a tent docked to the Living Shell Long Pro feels like a 1-bedroom apartment. It allows maximum privacy in the Land Breeze and huge living area in the Living Shell. It can fit both a single and a double expat mattress along with personal belongings and a single action table. I can have an expanded IGT setup to accommodate all my friends and family when I'm using the Living Shell Long Pro purely as a living room space. I have an IGT 4 unit in standing height for cooking and IGT table extensions to fit the entire group. The only downside to this is time. It does take significantly more time to set up 2 tent shelters comparing to 1. When setting up by myself, it took me over an hour to set up 2 tent shelters, and it took another 10 minutes to really dock the 2 together to make everything fits properly. That's why I would only recommend this setup if you're camping in a group. Last but not least, let's talk about the price. The Living Shell Long Pro comes in at a retail price of $1,900, and the Ivory version comes in at a retail price of $2,000. The difference between the regular version, which you see here, and the Ivory version is that the Ivory version costs a little bit more because it has a roof rainfly. I bet some of you guys are sticker shock right now because the price of the Living Shell Long Pro is about 4 times as much as an entry-level tent. But if you take in the craftsmanship and the quality of the material of the Living Shell Long Pro, the price is really justified. Now, if you do a quick Google search on 4-season tents, they are not cheap. They're all over $1,000 for a quality tent. So if you think about it this way, buying the Living Shell Long Pro is an investment for years to come. And snowpeak has a lifetime warranty, so if there's anything that goes wrong, they got you. I have friends that have used snowpeak tent and shelters for more than 10 years, and it's still functioning really, really well. Overall, the Living Shell Long Pro is such an amazing tent that really enables me to camp year-round in all 4 seasons. The multitude of mesh panels creates a living space that allows you to enjoy nature while still finding comfort in the harsh elements. It has 3 different configurations that makes camping comfortable, whether you're solo camping, camping with a partner, or entertaining a larger group of friends and family. The price of the Living Shell Long Pro is on the high end, but it's an investment for years to come. It's almost twice as heavy and takes longer to set up when compared to entry-level tent shelters. However, all of these efforts results in a larger living space and better protection from the environment. What are your thoughts on the Living Shell Long Pro? I would love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment. And if you found this video helpful, give this video a like and hit that subscribe button. It would mean a lot to me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.